Hi and welcome to the Bonsai Garden. It's currently the 27th of April and where I'm in Yorkshire in the UK, there's currently been a hosepipe ban declared, which means that I now have to water my bonsai with a watering can rather than the hosepipe which I've been using. Now I'm just going around the benches and looking to see what jobs need doing and just doing a quick review of my trees. So join me as I go through that. I just have over here a beech tree which I was trying to thread graft a new branch onto, and I've got the donor plant at the back here. I drilled a hole through the trunk here and I made a bit of a mess of it, to be honest. And you can see in there the bark has split, but what I'm hoping is that this branch, as it thickens, will effectively become like an approach graft. So where the cambium of the donor branch and the trunk meet up, I'm hoping that that will heal together as the branch thickens. So this was something of a learning experience and an experiment. So I'm going to see how that develops over the coming year or so, and hopefully it will resolve itself. And just over here is my $50 bonsai challenge tree, which is still looking okay. There's a couple of brown leaves under the bottom here, but I think in all of the respects the tree looks fairly healthy. I'm not overly concerned about whether it will survive or not. I'm fairly certain that it will. I've got a number of cuttings in pots down here. And these are cuttings from a Chinese juniper. There were two different types, which is why you can see that these ones have got a lighter colour and that one there has got a darker colour to it. I lost a couple of these, but these remaining ones seem fairly healthy and I'm hoping that they're going to survive, and I'm going to end up putting these into the little Zisha pots which I unboxed not so very long ago. Just in front here I've got some wood which is for another project which I will be videoing shortly, which is making some more monkey pole display poles. So keep an eye out for that. Here's one of my seed trays of Japanese maples. I collected these in November last year. Planted them up into these trays with a mixture of perlite, compost, agricultural grit and sand, and also some molar clay, and you can see that several of those have sprouted. We've got some really nice colours to the leaves. Now I probably need to separate some of those out at some point soon, or I may well leave them until spring now. If you've seen several of my previous videos, you may well have seen that I did an unboxing on this black pine seedling, and I've now transplanted that into a pond basket, and the idea is that that's just going to help the roots to develop with better aeration. That will thicken up the plant and give me better branching in the future. I was recently watching a Harry Harrington video on black pines and developing black pines, where he was suggesting that this time of year, sort of August time, is a good time for transplanting and repotting these plants whilst they're fairly dormant. And so I'm contemplating whether or not to actually transplant this into a pond basket, again for the same reason of trying to encourage the roots, although it does seem fairly established in this ceramic pot. And again, there are a number of branches on here which I'm currently intending on leaving in place for the time being, so the idea is that these will feed in and thicken up the base of the trunk, give me a much thicker tree. The nabari, the roots at the bottom of the trunk, look fairly substantial and spreading nicely into the soil. And I think at some point I will wire some of these branches further up, just to start positioning. And my aim with this particular tree is to create a small domed tree, probably no more than about 11 or 12 inches tall from the base of the pot. Now, because I've developed an interest in pines of late, I also picked up this Pinus Mugo Palmeter from the local garden centre, and you can see it's a dwarf species of Mugo pine. And my plan here is to try and keep this fairly small. I'll let a couple of these branches develop out, and in particular this apex, I will let that grow out just to thicken up the rest of the tree. And see how I get on with that. This is one of my garden maples, and you can see that due to the heat, the lack of rain at the moment, that's a bit shriveled. It hasn't died, and I am still watering it. I've got fresh leaves at the top that look okay, and I think that will recover. This is my butterfly maple forest. And you can see it's developed quite an attractive pink colour to it. Now, I was watching some discussions on Facebook about forests in general, and the consensus seemed to be that a great deal of people who put forests together use trees that are far too immature, and I'm probably as guilty of that as the next person. But I am quite pleased with how this is developing. I know it might not be to everybody's taste, but I think it creates a nice sort of maple grove appearance. Happy to hear your thoughts on that. Is it just sticks in pots? One of my developing blackthorns here. and you can see it's put on growth this season, and I'm just really leaving that to develop. I'm not really doing anything with that, certainly not for this year. I have just occasionally pinched out the growing tips, but I'm leaving that now and won't be doing anything more on that this season. This is my small Deshojo maple, and you can see it's got its full summer green colour to it at the moment. Where there are new leaves, those have come out bright pink, and I am anticipating that over the next couple of months it will start to take on that pinky hue again and lose the green colour from the leaves. I really haven't done a lot with this Katsura maple. I've just left it, occasionally trimmed the tips, but the development and the growth of that has definitely slowed down over the last couple of months. I'd be interested to take a proper look at the form of that once the leaves drop. In the pot next to that here, I've got another Deshojo maple. This was the tree where I accidentally decapitated the top of the tree after it had been growing in a pot, in a basket for 2 years. And it was a proper primal scream moment as I lost 2 years of growth from the top of that just as it was beginning to take a nice shape. And so I've had to try and regrow that. And I've effectively ground layered what I had. When I took the top of the tree off, I had an awkward shape, which was a trunk which came up perhaps 4 or 5 inches, and then it had 2 branches that came out on the same plane, but perhaps at a 90-degree angle to the trunk and also a 90-degree angle to each other. So what I've got growing here is effectively one of those branches, and the original trunk is actually buried under the soil. So I am hoping that when it comes to spring next year, when I have a look in here, that there are lots of roots coming out, and I can start thinking about the future of this tree again. And for the time being, I'm just letting it grow unfettered, and you can see there, that's all this season's growth, and I've done nothing with it, and I don't intend to. At this stage, it's all about trying to recover and rebuild the trunk again. I've got here on the bench my Varigated juniper. Now it's a bit of a mixed story with this one. You can see if I come in close to the branches, some of the inner foliage has browned off, but it's still growing quite vigorously on the tips there. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there, whether it's just old growth or whether it's shaded out. More than happy to hear feedback on what people might suggest here. So please give me your thoughts in the comments. Just at the back here, a plant which I haven't really spoken a lot about, which is my Chinese fringe, which has these peculiar spidery flowers on them. They're really quite attractive. It does keep its leaves through winter, but at some points it has looked like it has dried a bit, and so I've had to make sure that I keep this well watered. And it's in this lovely Tom Butterworth pot with the red band on it. I've got here my Magnolia Stellata, which I bought as a relatively inexpensive plant from the local DIY store B&Q, and I'm effectively regrowing and trying to position the branches on this using clip and grow techniques. So most of what you see here is new growth. I'm just going to leave that because what I will get in here is these will be next year's flower buds, I guess. All of my Fuji cherries have suffered a bit as a result of the drought. The leaves are browned, so I'm making sure that I keep those well watered. Here's another one, and you can see that the leaves are beginning to fall from there. In fact, I've got a cherry tree just in the entrance to my home, which has actually started going into flower again. So it's having a second spring after struggling and losing all of the leaves. So we've had a bit of a strange weather this year, and that's having an effect on the plants that are behaving in odd ways. And here's the cherry tree in the entrance to my home, which I mentioned, and you can see it's actually putting out flowers, which is fairly unusual. And about a month ago, the tree lost a lot of the leaves. It looked really dry and desiccated, and the response has been, I guess, a panic, and it's put out a new flush of flowers, and it's experiencing a false spring. This is one of my crab apple trees, developed from a whip which I bought from the Woodland Trust. Now I understand that perhaps when they're about 5 or 6 years old they can put out flowers, so I'm hoping that perhaps next spring I might get some flowers on here. It has suffered with woolly aphids from time to time, which I've had to treat, but it's looking okay for the time being, and you can see there are still new growing tips on the ends of these branches, which I'm pinching back to try and encourage ramification. Now just behind the end of my bonsai bench there is an area of about 1 metre square which I've been using to ground, grow and thicken up some trees, and just in there I've got a couple of trees, and in particular there is a birch which I'm growing and has put on quite some girth, and I'm just going to leave that for another couple of seasons and then take that out. Now the trees in there, there is a silver birch, there is an oak, there is a larch which has never really done very much, another crab apple, and also a Deshojo maple just down here, and all of those are planted over paving tiles which are buried perhaps 5 inches deep, and the idea is that the roots can't penetrate through the paving slab, and so they end up growing radially, which will be very helpful when it comes to putting these trees into shallow pots. This is one of my larch trees which I bought several whips to make a forest from Amazon or eBay, and I got about 16 trees for a fairly good price. This was one of the trees that I had left over, so I applied some wire to it to give it some nice shape, and you can see the twisty contorted branches. It has dried out a little bit, there are some dry needles on there. They're quite thirsty trees, so it's important to try and make sure that that keeps well hydrated, which obviously is a bit of a concern at the moment given that we have a drought and I now need to water everything with a watering can. So this is one of those trees I just need to be careful with. You can see it is still putting out growth, which probably just needs trimming back before it goes into autumn. And I'm perhaps guilty of sometimes putting trees into pots too early, so it might have benefited from being ground grown or even in a pond basket. So I perhaps slowed down the growth of this tree, but I'll see how it develops over the next year or so. The ground planting or putting it into a pond basket is still always an option if I feel that that's something that it might benefit from. Here is the Buddhist pine which I bought from the Japanese garden at Morgan near Newquay in the UK. And just looking at this, and it's been quite a slow developing tree in the perhaps 2 years that I've owned it. You can see the new growth on the ends of the branches, this sort of lighter green colour. And in fact I just noticed something a little bit peculiar which I've never seen before, which is just in here there's a couple of buds, and I'm not quite sure what those are. So if anybody has any comments or feedback on that, I'd be interested to hear. What are your thoughts on what that is? Here's my birch forest, and you can see it has grown quite tall and probably is in need of another trim back. In spring I need to replace this tree which died, and I've got a couple of candidate trees which I might use there. You can see all the leaves are beginning to take on a sort of autumnal buttery yellow colour and fall from the tree, and I think again that's part of this weird weather we've got where some of the trees are having false springs, early autumns and so on. So the trees are still putting out growth, but they're also beginning to shut down, I think, for autumn. And so I am expecting that these leaves are going to start falling. You can see they're just coming loose. What's happening with everybody else's trees in terms of the weather? Here's my large Chinese elm that I got for my 50th birthday from my brother, and you can see that there's been quite substantial growth. I think with adequate watering and the pleasant weather that we've had, lots of sunshine, it has helped increase the foliage and the growth on this plant, but it is now in need of a trim, I think, before we go into autumn. Just looking at this here on the table, you can see the long growth, and I'll simply be trimming that back and leaving perhaps 2 new leaves on each of these long extended branches. I understand that these will propagate quite easily from cuttings, so I don't know whether it's the right time of year to be trying this, but I am going to take that and plant it into some perlite and see what I get from that, whether it actually takes. And as I say, it might be the wrong time of year, but as an experiment for free, I think it's worth trying. think that's enough for the time being. And for the benefit of those who might demand it, here's the carnage can. I've planted some of them in this tray with my maple seedlings, and I'll just leave those and see how they develop, whether they put out roots or not. And similarly in this growing tray here, I've also planted up a couple of the cuttings into a couple of the empty pots which I had, and I'll just see how those develop. And that's that tree back on the benches. I've just got a couple more of my trees in development here. First of all is the hornbeam stump, which I trimmed in a video a little while back. And you can see there is some new growth on there that just needs trimming. And just looking at the wiring, wiring is fine, it's not biting in. There are no concerns about that. But I will just trim some of this growth back. And I can see that the trunk looks like it's firing up quite nicely. I'm not sure what the roots will be like. It'll certainly be interesting to see that, because I was trying to ground layer this particular tree and get it to put out roots just below the soil in the pot there. So I'm just going to quickly give that a trim. It does look like something's been having a bit of a nibble at the tree. So there we go, that's as much as I'm planning on doing on that moment. And I'll revisit that in spring and see where we go. The other tree that I've got here is an oak seedling, which I've been growing for perhaps about 2 years now. It's been growing in the basket. The idea is just to really thicken up the trunk, and I've got branches coming out from there which I can position, just trimming off the ends of those and trying to build some form to that really. It doesn't look like it needs anything much doing at the moment. So I hope you found that interesting and informative. Let me know what you're working on, and thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.